I'll call to order the April 4th, 2023 meeting of the Salem Planning Commission. Zachary, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Augustine is absent. Commissioner Eakes here. Commissioner Fott
Here.
Commissioner Goebel is also absent. President Griggs
Here.
Commissioner Heller
Here.
Commissioner Levin here. Commissioner Slater here. Commissioner Vieira Brenda here. We have one.
Thank you, Zachary. Appreciate that. We'll move through the public comment because we don't have anybody here for that section, and we don't have anything in the consent calendar, but we'll get doubled up on those minutes probably for the next meeting and get approval of that then. So we will move to item 5.1 under the public hearings. Before I turn to the staff for Bryce, are there any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest to declare? Seeing nobody jumping up, that would be great. Zachary, would you read the statement of criteria, please?
We're in Columbia. This is a public hearing to consider minor comprehensive plan change, zone change, conditional use, permit, urban growth, preliminary declaration, Class 3 site plan review, Class 2 adjustment, Class 2 driveway approach permit, and Class 1 design review case number CPC-ZC-UTA-SPR-APJ-EAP-DR 23-01. For 1851 Gordon Road Southeast. The criteria applicable to this application are found in the Family Revised Code SRC Chapter 64.025E2, Comprehensive Plan Map Amendment, 265.005E Zone Change, 240.005D Conditional Use Permit, 200.025D and E Urban Growth Preliminary Declaration, 220.005F3 Class 3 site plan review, 250.005D2 Class 2 adjustment, 804.025D Class 2 driveway approach permit, and 225.005E1 Class 1 design review. Failure to raise an issue prior to the close of the public hearing, statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Planning Commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals LUBA on that issue. A similar failure to raise constitutional issues relating to proposed conditions of approval precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony. The Planning Commission may or will then either continue the public hearing or leave the record open for at least 7 days.
Thanks, Zachary. I think you got stuck with the longest subject item. Bryce, it's all yours.
Yes, good evening, President Griggs, members of the commission. I'm Vice Chair. All these new changes, it's been the first time back in the council chambers for a couple of years, so I'm just gonna get used to this real quick here and see how it's looking. All right, yeah. Good evening, President Griggs, members of the commission. Bryce Bishop with the City Salem Planning Division. I'm here tonight to present the staff report for this proposed consolidated case, which, as evidenced by Zach's reading of the criteria, is quite a few components. So it's a case for property located at 1851 Gordon Road Southeast, and it's for a 396-unit multifamily development. Included is a comprehensive plan change and zone change for a small 1.39 acre portion of the relatively larger overall property to change the comp plan map designation from industrial to industrial commercial, and the zoning, which currently doesn't correspond to the comp plan designation of RA to an IC zone. So it's consistent with that of the surrounding property that is under the same ownership and intended to accommodate the development. There is a conditional use permit for the proposed 396-unit multifamily development because it's zoned IC, and at the time of application submittal, it was zoned conditional. The multifamily use was a conditional use permit in that zone. Also, because it's outside the city's urban service area, there is an urban growth area preliminary declaration required in conjunction with the application to determine what public facilities are needed to serve the development, such as water, sewer, streets, storm, and parks. There's also a Class 3 site plan review to evaluate this project for conformance with all applicable standards of the code, a Class 2 adjustment to 3 different standards. One deals with the location of parking in relation to buildings on the site. Another class 2 adjustment to reduce the amount of buildable width that can be occupied by buildings placed at the setback line for the proposed development, and then a third adjustment dealing with the articulation of the ground level units facing the street along Court Road, Street A within the development, cul-de-sac turned around at the very end of Salem to the drive, driveway approach permit for 4 driveways onto the internal streets, and then finally multifamily design review for evaluation of proposal in conformance with the multifamily design standards. So that's just the overall general rundown of what's included in this application in terms of where the site is located. Again, it's at 1851 Court Road Southeast. Properties highlighted in orange there. It's 23.32 acres in size. And it is, of course, it's in the northwest quadrant of the interchange Court Road and North Sandy Highway. Court Road is to the southeast. There are 2 or 3 local streets which stub into the property. Whitaker Drive, which is here to the east of the property, and then 2 local streets, Clydesdale Drive and Salem Slough Drive, which are dead end streets that terminate at the north end of the site that are currently in the county. In terms of site conditions, again, the property is 23.32 acres in size, and the tax lots can't be seen on this map, but it's comprised of 5 different properties. And there is a condition that's recommended in the application to address the existing lines in relation to the proposed buildings, because the lines go through the existing buildings and parking that are proposed, so those have to be eliminated. The condition part of the building permit to consolidate or reconfigure those to align with the development. There are existing trees on the property. All of these trees are below the size that we would consider them as significant. So therefore, under our tree ordinance, and because this development is multifamily, not a residential subdivision, non-significant trees aren't required to be retained beyond the date of building permit or site plan review approval. And so in order to accommodate the development, the growth of trees, here will be removed. And again, they're not significant. They're like 10 to 12 inches. So they don't reach that 30-inch DBH threshold, which would be significant. And there are no organoid oaks on the property that are 20 inches or greater. And then the proposed development does preserve 36 trees that are the northwest portion of the site. We're in the proximity of the wetland area, and those will be retained in the open space area with the development. So in terms of mapped landslide hazard points, there are none on the property, and therefore there is no requirement for any kind of geoassessment or geotechnical report. The only ones present are associated with the types of bills associated with Court Road and I-5, or not I-5, but Highway 22. And then in terms of wetlands, there are mapped wetlands on the property and hydric soils. The existing conditions plan that's included in the staff report shows the existing wetland areas up in the northwest portion of the site and also the southeastern portion of the site. And so there is a mapped wetland area, kind of a channel and drainage associated with this band of hydric soils here in green. The proposed development a portion of it is within that wetland area. So there's a condition of approval on the decision that requires part of the building permit. The applicant has to obtain the necessary required approvals from the Department of State Lands to address development in those wetland areas. And if the permit could not be obtained from DSL to develop in that area, they would have to reconfigure the plan and come back for a modification. In terms of the comprehensive plan change that's included and zone change that's included with the proposal, the portion of the site that's proposed to be changed is in its comp plan and zone designations is the little square piece right here. Currently, it's designated industrial on the comprehensive plan map, and they are looking to change or requesting to change that to industrial commercial, so that the property has a consistent comp plan designation with that of the property to the northeast to accommodate the development. And in terms of the zone change, it's currently designated residential agriculture, RA. It was previously used as a home, and obviously the RA zone is not a zone that is consistent with the industrial designation. So along with the comp plan change, we're looking to change the zoning of the property from RA to IC to match that of the rest of the property to accommodate the proposal. Staff's analysis of the comp plan zone change is included in pages 6 to 15 of the report. As identified in the findings, it meets the criteria for the comp plan and the zone change. The requested designations are consistent with the designations of surrounding property. And it will allow for a consistent designation across the entire site in order to accommodate the development. It conforms to the statewide planning goals and the applicable policies of the Salem Comprehensive Plan. And there is a condition of approval recommended in conjunction with the comp plan zone change to limit the total number of average daily trips generated by the proposed on the site based on a reasonable worst case, trip generation estimate and assessment to 385 for that particular property. And that trip cap works in conjunction with the trip cap that was established with the property to the north and the east of that, which was previously changed. It had a separate trip cap. And the bottom line is the proposed development does not exceed the previous trip cap established for the proposed development and will not have an impact on the transportation system. In terms of the conditional use permit, it's required to, the proposed multifamily development is required to get a conditional use permit in the C zone. As identified in the staff report on pages 15 to 18, the proposal does comply with the criteria for a conditional use permit. It's a conditional use permit. It's a conditional use in the zone. Its impact is minimized based on the fact that it's consistent with surrounding land uses. To the east, there's multifamily. To the east, there's also gas station and storage area. And to the north, there's single family, and single family is not an incompatible use with multifamily, especially when you take into consideration the fact that the city has standards to deal with the compatibility of multifamily adjacent to single family with setbacks and landscaping and screening that the development is required to comply with. And the proposed density that would otherwise, is proposed, on for this site. It's at 396 units on the 23.32 acre property. Is the number of units allowed there falls at the lower end range of what would be allowed in a multifamily zone, and in zone multifamily today, because the multifamily zone has a density of between 15 to 31 units, and at that density range, there could be a minimum of 350 up to a maximum of 723 dwelling units on the property. And this is at 396. So the development in IC zone here with multifamily is below what to be done in a multifamily zone. So with the number of units, the development standards to ensure compatibility and consistency with adjacent properties that meets the criteria for a conditional use permit, and staff is recommending a condition of approval to limit the total number of units on the property that the amount proposed at 396. In terms of the site plan here, it's kind of looks fully washed out. On that screen, but again, we have the 396 units. They're kind of broken into two portions. There's A Street, or Street A shown on the site plan. That's a street that provides a connection between Whitaker Drive to the east and Clydesdale Drive to the north. The other dead end street, Salem Slough, dead ends to the north end of the property, like Clydesdale does, but instead of providing a street extension through the property that was alluded to in a previous condition of approval of the zone change, the comp plan zone change that applied to the remainder of the site, exclusive of the RA zone piece down here. The multi-use path, 10-foot wide multi-use path is proposed to provide pedestrian connectivity from the development to the south property line of Miller Elementary School, provide pedestrian access rather than street access, because when you look at the odd, configuration of the property, as it relates to the right of way that's been dedicated for Corden Road and Highway 22, or the interchange for Highway 22 and Corden Road, it does kind of make it difficult to, bring a street down, run it over to the east, because there's really only one point of exit of that street connection, and that is, due to the existing development constraints that surround the property. So. And so there's a street that goes through pedestrian access, from the development to the school property, at least to the southern boundary for a future potential connection if the school district decides to, provide a connection from the property boundary to the school. And then there's 222 units on the western side of Street A that goes to the site, and 174 units on the eastern side of the street. The property or the development includes a total of 774 spaces, which exceeds our minimum parking requirement. It's not exceed the maximum. There are 42 bicycle spaces that are provided throughout the site that exceeds the minimum requirement. There are 3 loading spaces throughout the site, and then 2 trash and recycling areas located within the development. So in review of the site plan review application for conformance with the standards of the IC zone and the other applicable standards, including the general development standards and any other and all other chapters that are applicable. The staff report identifies that the proposed development as recommended to be conditioned meets those standards. And so there are several standards included within the decision that we're recommending to require conformance with various standards of the SRC. Require public infrastructure and right-of-way dedication for the development. It's always required for developments. And then there are three conditions that specifically, are a little bit unique because they require some further analysis in terms of feasibility. And then the one condition is condition 3, and that condition deals with the existing tax lines or property that are associated with the properties that currently make up the site. And so there are currently 5 tax lots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that make up the overall 23.32 acre site. And when you look at the property lines in relation to the buildings, obviously they're going through the buildings, they're going through the parking areas. So those property lines will need to be reconfigured or consolidated in some fashion to accommodate the development and meet standards. So condition number 3 requires part of building permit approval that those existing tax lots need to be addressed and consolidated to accommodate the development. Condition 4 deals with a weird issue that applies to the southern property line. So when one looks at the assessor's map today and compares it to what is shown on the applicant site plan, there is a discrepancy there. And the big area of concern is this yellow shaded area where the green line is the site plan shown by the applicant, and then the red line is the assessor's, what the property line looks like based on the assessor's map. So there is an uncertainty, where the 30-foot difference came from. Subsequent to the staff report being published, staff looked at surveys from Marion County and did find 2 surveys in the Marion County survey records that appear to indicate that the 30-foot yellow shaded area is not actually right of way. It appears to be a permanent roadway, a frontage road easement that was at least on a survey dating back in 1993, and would have been established to allow an alternative means of access, from the properties on the north side of Corden Road here, and because they couldn't have frontage or they couldn't have direct access on the Corden. So ODOT, it looks like they acquired a 30-foot permanent roadway easement. So it's not right of way, but it is an easement. But somehow the Marion County assessor's maps have shown that it's dedicated right of way, which it really isn't. So in order to address that 30-foot discrepancy, there's a condition that we're recommending prior to building permit. We have to identify that and has to identify the correct southern boundary, and then go through whatever process is necessary with ODOT to vacate that easement because it's no longer needed. With the proposed development here in the internal streets, with Whitaker going through, there will be no more access to Corden Road or Highway 22, obviously, and all access will be internal. ODOT, in speaking with them, they don't need that anymore, but they're uncertain where if that's already been surplused or what the status of it is. So there's some additional work that needs to be done to figure out what is the status of that before building permits can be obtained. And the final kind of unique condition is the one that deals with wetlands. And again, here's a zoom in at the site that kind of shows the band of hybrid soils in green that go through the site, and the delineated wetland is in this general area. And because of the development occurring inside of that wetland area, they will have to comply. The applicant will need to comply with the Department of State land requirements for removal and fill of wetlands. Our chapter 809, which deals with wetlands, or requires us to send notice to DSL, and notice what's provided. And there has been a wetland delineation concurred by the state, I guess. And so then the applicant will need to comply with Army Corps and DSL requirements in order to develop in that area. In terms of design review, there are 5 main categories of design review that our standards cover, and those include open space, both common and private, landscaping, site safety and security, parking and site design, and then finally building facade design. So in the staff report on pages 37 to 48, we identify how the proposal meets those design standards and there are conditions that are recommended to comply with those standards and where there need to be a condition. And there were, again, 3 requested adjustments to, or adjustments to 3 of those design standards. In terms of landscaping, open space, and parking, there's 3 different, plans here to show landscaping because the site is so large, but there's trees that are proposed to be distributed throughout the site, around buildings, shrubs and landscaping beds around buildings. And there are conditions of approval to ensure that there will be street trees provided on the internal street. There are some areas where a number of tree planting units around the buildings fall short of the minimum requirements, so there's conditions to make sure that the number of trees along the buildings meets the standards. And the parking lots are broken up with trees planted, in planter bays where there are no more than 12 spaces in a row before you get a planter bay with a tree in it. But there's also a standard in the design review requirements for tree spacing. So it also says you can't have more than 50 feet along the perimeter of a parking, without a tree. And so there are some areas, even though they're meeting the planter bay requirements, there's still a requirement that for every 50 feet along the perimeter of the parking area, you need to have 1 canopy tree. So there are areas throughout the site where there needs to be additional canopy trees provided around the perimeter of the site. So there's a condition to ensure that that is met. But other than that, parking areas are all generally behind the buildings, not between the building and the street, except for one area where you have a parking area to the north here, where it's between building 29 and the cul-de-sac turnaround of Salem Slough. Obviously, the building, because it has frontage on 2 streets, it's hard to have, the building, occupying the frontage on both sides. So without a parking lot, so there wasn't an adjustment to allow this parking lot between the building and the street. But the more significant street, which is Street A that goes through the site of the building, is close to that in conformance with the general conformance with the design review requirements there. And so that adjustment we're recommending to approve. And then this is just other shots of the landscape plan, showing the parking in buildings on the different portions of the site. So this is kind of the south portion next to Court Road, with Street A going through the portion of eastern portion. And then here's finally the northeastern portion where you have the development and the landscaping is being provided. So, and then the category of building and facade design, these design standards require building maps to be broken up, by not having really long buildings, by having offsets and differentiation of materials and other approaches to break up building mass in bulk. There are a couple buildings that exceed, by a small amount, the maximum 100 feet. They're like at roof length. They're like 108, so there's a condition to modify the roof length to comply with those. There's a few buildings where there are windows missing in some of the habitable rooms, other than bathrooms, and we have a condition on here to ensure that those windows are provided in all the habitable rooms other than bathrooms. And the one design review standard for building and facade design that an adjustment has been requested for is how the buildings are designed. When you're within 25 feet of a street, you have to have a primary pedestrian entrance that faces and is articulated with a direct connection to the sidewalk. So the proposed development does have direct connections from all those units within 25 feet of the property line abutting the street. So I'll just go back here real quick. So all the buildings within 25 feet of a property line abutting the street, they have to have a primary entrance that faces the street with a direct connection to the sidewalk. And that primary entrance has to be articulated to make it look like an entrance. And so that applies along street. Applies along Street A here because all these buildings are within 25 feet. It applies along Cordon Road because these 3 buildings are within 25 feet. So, but when you look at the building elevation design, the buildings are laid out so that you enter. This facade here generally faces those streets, and so the other facade that faces the parking lot has kind of the articulated porch, or this other facade does not have the architecture articulation. It does have a door that's other than a slider, but it doesn't have an articulated entry that is kind of has the same prominence as the other side. So we are recommending to not approve that adjustment, and we're just recommending complying with the standard that says within 25 feet, provided provide an articulated entry to those entries, primary entries for the buildings. And they do enter into living rooms and dining rooms, so it's not like they're entering into like a private bedroom. But the way they're kind of designed currently is if you're kind of walking under the the private underfloor balconies of the units. So looking for more articulation there on that entry. And so we kind of went over these class 2 adjustments generally. So the one where there's the parking lot located between building 29 and the street, we're recommending that be approved because it's the only location and it's a unique circumstance where you have a building that is fronting on the main street and it just happens to have a parking lot between it and the cul-de-sac turnaround, which is a minor street in comparison to how the site is laid out. Also, I didn't talk about this one, adjustment B. It is a standard that requires that at least 40% of the buildable width of a lot along a street has to be occupied by buildings at the setback line. And so generally in a multifamily zone, if this were occurring, the setback is generally 20 feet for a multifamily building. But because this is an IC zone, the setback in the IC zone is 5 feet. And so, and then what you do in terms of applying the standard is you have to look at, okay, how much frontage do you have, street frontage do you have along each street? So you look at the linear length along each side of the street. So we look at it on the east side here and the west side and figure out, okay, what it is, what the length is, take out the setbacks that are required on either side, and then multiply that times 40%. So 40% of that length has to have buildings that are like right up next to the street at that setback line. And in the case of the IC zone, it would be 5. In a multifamily zone, it would be 20. And so the proposed development, and so that applies wherever you have a street. And so you have street A here where this applies, you have the cul-de-sac turnaround of Salem where it applies, and then you have Corden Road where it applies, where you have street frontage, and 40% of it needs to be occupied by buildings at the setback line. So as seen on the plan, and when you measure up the length, the buildings are occupying more than 40% of the length on each side of those facades, except for Salem where they don't have, where there isn't, really any buildings close to Salem because there's wetlands there and there's other factors that limit that from being readily applicable or easily attainable. But along Corden Road, you have more than 40% of its frontage occupied by buildings. And the same thing with Street A, but the difference is it's the distance. Instead of 5 feet, they're around 19 variable, like 16 to 19 to 20 to 22. So it's a variable setback with the intent of the standard is equally met though, because you have a 3-story building that's relatively still close to the streets. You would see in a typical multifamily zone development, staff is recommending approval of that adjustment because the buildings are still occupying the majority of the right of way. They're just set back a little bit farther than the 5 feet. And 5 feet is, is very close, so the little bit further distance there is consistent with what you see in a multifamily zone. And then, so on the adjustments, we're recommending approval of A and B, and then the third one about the ground floor dwelling unit articulated entries, we're not recommending approval of that, but then just complying with the standard to comply with it. And then in terms of the driveway approach permit, they're asking for a driveway approach permit for 4 driveway approaches, 3 onto Street A and 1 on Sales Drive. Those driveways are safe and won't result in adverse impacts to access and development of the property. So we're recommending approval of those. And then that gets us through the applications, and then in terms of public comment. So the properties within the SEMCA or the Southeast Mill Creek Association Neighborhood Association. No comments have been received from the neighborhood association. Similarly, there is no homeowners association, so obviously no comments from that entity. One comment was received prior to the staff report and prior to the hearing tonight, expressing concern about traffic congestion on Whitaker as a result of the gas station that's been developed to the east, and situations where Amazon delivery drivers will park on both sides of Whitaker, exchange packages to be delivered, and kind of reduces it to one road with creates an issue with congestion. And the comment seeks to have a second means of accessing the development other than just Whitaker. And this will do that by extending Whitaker through the property to Clydesdale, and provide that through connection and connectivity to a greater network of streets. And then in terms of agency comments, the Salem Kaiser School District reviewed the proposal and provided the normal comments about the impact of the development on school capacity based on the projected number of students that would reside in the development. But then they also noted the 10-foot multi-use path that is shown on the site plan, and they recommend that the path be removed. And so, but staff would disagree with that position. And the reason they recommend the path be removed is because they don't have any plans to open it up and have gated access. And but on the other hand, this access is needed in order to provide future pedestrian access. And just like streets, we require streets to be stubbed to the perimeter of properties in order to provide for future street access to neighboring development. And in this case, they're not providing a second street connection with sales through the property, and in lieu of that, they're providing this proposed pedestrian access. And so even if it doesn't go through at this point, we've provided a pedestrian access stub that would be easily connected to once the school district, if they decide in the future to provide a path from the terminus of it to the main school. Because when you look at the site plan, let's see, just doing that. So the path will connect, would extend all the way along the north line of the property, past Clydesdale, past Sales Slough, and generally in this area. But again, the school district, because it's a field at this point, they don't have any access trail proposed. But in order to make sure that there's the possibility to connect it in the future to serve all of the 396 units in this development, and then all the developments to the east, multifamily units to the east, and provide a more direct connection to the school at some point in the future, we recommend until it's really necessary to have that connection, because if not, it forces students to have to walk, either Clydesdale or Salem Slough, kind of out of the way path in order to get, to come back around again to the school. So we feel that since the property is being developed, this is the time to require such a connection for pedestrian access. And then in terms of other agency comments, the Oregon Department of Transportation commented and indicated that obviously there can't be any access, from the site to Gordon Road or Highway 22, which is not proposed with this development. And then finally, we did get a comment from Chariots indicating that there is a need for four transit stops on the site, two kind of located in the northern portion and then two in the southeastern portion. And based on the requirements of the City Streets chapter, whenever the transit district identifies a need for transit stops, we're required to provide those stops as a required element of the streetscape. And so this wasn't included in the original planning commission staff report we received, but proposing to add this condition to comply with chapter 803, which is our streets chapter. And then it's just the applicant should coordinate with Chariots to locate and construct 4 transit stops conforming to the applicable Salem area mass transit district standards along Street A through the property. So in their comments that get submitted, these are the general locations that they were identified. And so this would just require the applicant to work with the transit district to site and build those stops along the property, along the street there. And then with that, staff would conclude and recommend that planning commission adopt the staff report and the findings for in the year before 2023 staff report with the additional recommended condition about transit stops on Street A.
So that you condition 33, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Any questions for Bryce? At this point, we'll have other opportunities. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. Would you explain to me the process of approving the stream? The wetland. My understanding was if a wetland was identified, that it would not necessarily be approved. So I'm not sure why the planning division went ahead and just sort of bumped it up. I mean, is that normal?
Application review process.
So
in terms of the application review process, if there is a wetland on a property, our requirements in our code, chapter 809 for our wetlands ordinance require notice to the Department of State Lands, and that's all. We don't have a local regulatory chapter that deals with removal of fill of wetlands. That's deferred to the state and their requirements. And so the applicant will have to make an application to the state to remove the wetland and mitigate it. And if they don't get approval, then the condition requires that they have to reconfigure the site, and then that would require modification. And back for another approval with a modified plan.
Okay, so at your level or our level, we don't have an option.
Just at this point, now with the local wetlands ordinance that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
we just require, them to be mapped and identified, and if there is development in the area, we have to provide notice to DSL, and the applicant has to comply with the requirements of DSL.
Thank you. Also, I have a question about the growth of trees. What species of tree?
They're like pines, they're evergreen trees.
Okay.
And they're none of them are significant. They're all, 10 to 12, 13 inches. They're not anything that is a big tree or a tree or 30 inches.
Sure, okay. And so how many trees, there was some discussion somewhere in here that that certain trees would be removed along the road to widen a roadway or to complete a roadway.
That was
If they remove city-owned trees in the corded road right way to widen that right of way,
Yes.
then they would need tree removal permits.
Okay.
But that is if they widen the roadway along the road.
Okay.
So it's unclear at this point if that would be required and what those species are.
Okay,
We would review that and plan review to determine if that would be required.
thank you. That's it, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner, you guys.
Thank you. My initial question before you got to the end was going to be about the transit stops. And apparently what you're saying is that Chair says your transit stop, and it's required. So that answered that question, but I'm curious now about the process of determining whether a transit stops. Is that related to existing transit routes, or is that an anticipation? Is it related to the concentration and the number of people,
It's
or?
related to kind of, I think, it's related to, I think, all of the above, so the transit district, they have long range plans and they're planning for growth as well. And so if they see an area where there's likelihood a need to provide a transit route through there and serve the increased population area, that's they're identifying, so they're getting constructed.
Okay, thanks, that helps.
And this is a new requirement that came into the code with the last GDC update in 2021. So it's relatively new standard, but it's good to require greater coordination between the planning and the transit district.
Makes sense, thank you. If I could follow up general traffic question. There's a lot of material in here, so I'm not sure that, I'm sort of asking you to give me a big picture view here. Because I recall it said somewhere that Cordon Road is not up to the standards for this classification status it has. We're adding, I think what it estimated was 385 trips, not all of which may be on Cordon Road, but sort of trying to fit all of this together on how we have a street that's not up to its classification standard. We have this 396 units and an estimated 385 additional trips, which apparently don't put it over the trip cap, but it's still adding a lot of traffic to the area. And we went through a lot of design and stuff, so I'm trying to fit all that together. Maybe you can tell me how all the condition of the road, the additional traffic, and all of the recommendations fit into the traffic.
Do you want to present?
Thank you. They do have a condition of approval that recommends boundary street improvements along Gordon Road, so that section along their frontage would be improved. The city traffic engineers reviewed the proposal, and they also submitted a traffic impact analysis that recommended no additional mitigation outside of boundary street improvements. And so with that traffic impact analysis, as well as the comprehensive plan zone change trip cap conditions and then complying with those, traffic is satisfied that the development meets our criteria for approval, especially considering the boundary street improvements and the interior streets that will be required to be constructed with development.
Okay, so basically we're relying on boundary street improvements. But we're saying that it's a traffic impact is within the framework of what we would allow, and that the only improvements we think are needed are the boundary street improvements.
And I think a key, correct me if I'm wrong, would it be, you know, in the traffic study, it indicated that some were like not meeting the level of service, but this proposal wasn't changing the current, making that level of service worse than what it already is. And, yeah, so.
Yeah, I agree.
And then also, Joe, I'd also point out that, you know, the trip cap for the remainder of, there's the 1.93 acre RA zone piece down here, but then there was the rest of the property that was changed back in 2012 to IC industrial commercial, and that comp plan zone change was analyzed for compliance with our transportation planning rule both well with the state and traffic impacts, and the trip cap even associated with this, you know, this property and then the properties to the east cumulatively, this development does not even exceed the previous, you know, trip cap, you know, so it's under, you know, it's under the thresholds that have been previously applied to the property to make sure it doesn't impact the transportation system.
I had a question. I heard that Counselor, I think it's Counselor Phillips, is talking about trying to figure out how to do that overpass on Highway 22 to connect. Would that be in that vicinity? So it would connect to Bill Regal Park that you referenced in the report, because it's hard for people to get to that park across Highway 22.
Yeah, this is, you know, this is obviously the interchange. It's a city, you know, interchange. It's ODOT's master plan, but it's not something that ODOT would build. It would be a city project. Sorry.
You're talking about the pedestrian bridge, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's talking about the pedestrian bridge that's proposed over I-5 to connect, or 22, sorry, and you can kind of see the Regal Park on the left side.
Yep.
Of the picture, just right in front right there, right? So it's proposed to go
Right there.
across, but
Oh,
I'm
that's-
not sure. I don't think it's gonna, the proposal is for it to land impact on this property.
But it's in the vicinity.
It's in the vicinity.
That's awesome.
That's been a long desire for city's trying. You were talking about that, the interchange.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't say pedestrian. That was other questions.
Bryce, can you just walk me through the connectivity in the interior of what the new streets are? I wasn't quite able to follow it on all the drawings.
Let me get to the site plan here. So,
I'm assuming Street A is going to be named after a horse.
yeah, that'll be something we determine when it, I guess it's street naming. I don't know if, is this Whitaker and one end and Seattle Slough, you know,
In
the other.
Clarksdale.
Right, I'm sorry, Clydesdale, on the other. So Commissioner Slater, so in terms of, yeah, so that there's Clydesdale to the north, that goes into the residential neighborhood. There's also Seattle Slough that's ending in a cul-de-sac turnaround because it's a dead end today. Clydesdale goes all the way through to connect to Whitaker. Then Whitaker goes out to Gaffin, and then Gaffin to Court. And then in terms of on-site connectivity there, you know, so for vehicles first, you know, we have two driveways kind of here on A Street and one here on A Street for providing intergated entries, you know, secure access for the residents to get onto the site. And then there's a fourth one here to provide access to Salem Slough. And, you know, then obviously the development has internal driveways and parking lots throughout. There's pedestrian, you know, connections along, you know, the parking areas that provide access to all the units. Each of the units have connections out to the street for pedestrian access. And then the multi-use path along the north is, you know, goes along here, crosses Clydesdale, and then goes over and then connects to, you know, south side of Miller Elementary School property.
You have a follow-up question, Commissioner Tiger?
I do, I'm sorry. So when I was looking at this, the nearest kind of shopping area is over on Lancaster. So if someone wants to go to the grocery store or something, they're gonna drive on, is it Clydesdale? They
Yes.
drive to Clydesdale and that would access over to Ricky.
They get that, eventually, I think you'll get to Ricky. You know,
And then over
but
to Lancaster.
you go north to go west.
Or you would take Whitaker to Gaffin to Portland Road.
Yeah, so here's a little bit further, it is good down to, you know, Ricky. Looks like into, what is that? Arabian, and that gets over to, 46, then you move north and south, and, there's, way, and I don't know, I think Ricky's maybe a little bit further to the north off of the screen here. And, but then, Whitaker is over here, Whitaker to Gaffin, Gordon, and then.
I think Whitaker connects out to Clay, which is a more direct route.
Those different streets.
You know,
Clay.
Whitaker to Clay, if you look at the map says up there, that's McClay. Turn left and that will take you down. Turn into Ricky.
So if you're in that development, you have two kind of routes that you can choose, the Gordon Road by Whitaker, or you can go to Clay through the neighborhood. Is that right?
You can go to east of McClay or you go through Clydesdale.
Thank you. That was it.
Mr. Ekus?
You notice in the report, page 32, makes reference to removal of street trees in the right of way may be required if the applicant elects to construct boundary street improvements instead of a payment in lieu of improvements. Does that mean that I've decided that this is something that qualifies for they have the alternative of choosing in the payments?
Yeah, it is, because there's a previous settlement agreement, I believe, correct, is that correct? That allows that option for boundary streets.
Okay, so it's possible if there won't be boundary street improvements.
Yeah, that is true. But still, like, it doesn't exceed the trip cap. It's below even the previous trip cap before the 385 are added as additional. So there aren't any impacts to the transportation system.
There are questions at this time, I'm going to opportunity. Thank you, Bryce. The applicant would like to come up and testify, and as you know, you have 15 minutes. Let's just start talking and please state your name and address for the record or.
Make sure you good on the video.
You can stop the share, but otherwise.
Good evening. My name is Brandy Dalton. I'm a land use consultant with Multi-Tech Engineering. We're located at 1155 Southeast 13th Street, Salem, Oregon, 97302. Bryce did a thorough job of the application, so there's not a lot for me to say because I just be repeating everything. My findings and the site plans are all part of the record and the staff report. A couple things Bryce touched upon is that we are asking for a common zone change for about 2 acres of the site to rezone it from RA to IC so it can be consistent with the rest of the property. This allows us to develop phase 3 with about 396 units and provide needed housing that's needed in the area and Salem as well. This is an application I believe we've been working with staff on for about a year now. We've had pre-apps, a neighborhood meeting, and just discussions with staff to work out all the vehicle connections that are required, pedestrian connections that are required, circulation within the site, and some of the conditions of approval that are in the staff report as well. We have reviewed all 32 of the conditions of approval and number 33 that Bryce went over, and we're good with all of them. We knew most of them were coming, and they are all things that can be that are doable. Condition 3 and 4, as Bryce stated, deal with property lines. And we will be working with our surveyor, ODOT, and city staff to make sure that the property lines are accurate and they are established how they're supposed to be legally. And we will also be eliminating some of the property lines that are in the interior of the subject property as well, meet those conditions. Wetlands, there's a condition dealing with wetlands, and I believe somebody asked about wetlands. We are currently working on the wetlands delineation, so we'll be going through that process very soon. It's a timely process, so usually we go through trying to get the development approval first as we're working through that. We will be working with DSL as soon as that goes in for their review. I also wanted to see there's trees were brought up. With the development, whenever there's conditions of approval for street improvements, right away, and as you can tell, we do the streets going through our project. There are trees that have to be removed, and we are well aware that that requires a tree removal permit through Public Works, and we're planning as well, so we would make sure that's done. And transit stops. Bryce had mentioned it to me earlier that transit will be requiring 4 stops. It makes sense. It's a big development. It's going to provide circulation to the north and to the east. So we will work with transit on the location of those stops. And I believe that were the questions. Bryce addressed traffic and connectivity and the inland for street trees. So I believe I addressed all those. So as far as that goes, we did address all the criteria that warrants approval. Any standards that we couldn't outright meet, we did ask for adjustments to, as Bryce stated. So we are asking the planning commission to approve our project.
Thank you. So questions for that, for the applicant from commissioners at this time. Commissioner Falk, followed by Commissioner Heller.
Thank you. So I'm curious if you are planning on any amenities or community infrastructure as part of this development, specifically thinking of like a park, EV charging stations as part of your parking, and maybe an expansion of the multimodal path in the site as opposed to just along the north boundary. Kind of aligned with that. Just strategies for meeting climate-friendly and equitable community goals.
That's actually a great question because we're seeing that more and more developments and a lot of it is being required. I can't speak for the developer. This particular development came in before a lot of those requirements were put into the code. So as far as electric vehicle stations go, it was not, I can't tell you whether the developer is going to do it. But your comments, I can definitely make sure that we pass them on to the developer, so they're aware that that question came up. Concern as far as that goes. As far as parks go, we are providing more than the required open space. I am glad to hear about that pedestrian bridge to the park across the way, because that's actually a great idea, because nobody can get to it from this development without something like that. We are not going to be providing because the requirements are pretty high for what it would require. We'd have to give up a lot of our property. We would be able to provide the needed housing aspect for the site. So we will pay a fee in lieu to help hopefully go towards other ways to provide that for the residents. So there is a school adjacent that will have the residents will have a pedestrian path to the school to the north. So and then on-site open space.
Sure. Did you only have?
I just have one more follow-up. So then thinking about the facade and building design, will there be consideration for creating a design language that supports identity of place and a kind of pride of place for residents who live there?
I don't know how to answer that because I'm not designing the buildings. So that is something I don't know if anybody else in my group is able to answer that, but I'm not able to answer whether that, but I will put, do you have any ideas on what you've seen in other developments?
I am an architect, so.
Okay, it's not here, so I don't know, but I mean, have you seen other?
I mean, I think there are strategies as far as, you know, color and materials can certainly be used to, create identity for each building, that is really not. Essentially, I would hope that we can avoid the sort of sea of similar housing, so that when you step onto the site, it's not just the same building being replicated in every location. So that's, I think, one aspect of it. And then in addition to that, I think it's creating a pedestrian pathways throughout that support that kind of community living. So you're not just housing people, but you are creating homes and community.
I would agree.
Great comments.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heller, followed by Commissioner Slade.
Thank you. I'm curious about the perceived market. Who are your renters going to be?
That's another question that I can't answer, but typically what we look at is these are going to be market rate. They're not low income housing units. So I don't know what the market rate will be by the time we get to that stage. So
So it's middle income perhaps, or?
It could be, again, I don't know what the market rate would be. I don't do that kind of analysis, so for me to even tell you something, I would be, it'd be just a yes, not a good. So I'd hate to put that and have that on the record when I don't hold.
That's it. Is it Commissioner Slade?
So goal 13 talks about energy conservation. This picks up a little bit what Commissioner Fott addressed. So I think the application detail says when developed, new construction will provide the opportunity to provide improved construction and building techniques which improves and conserves energy uses of new buildings. So I'm wondering if you could walk through any sort of activity or any sort of facilities that you're providing that go beyond the code in terms of energy conservation, renewable energy, or any facilities like that.
I believe that right now, I don't have that kind of information. I know we look at the materials that we'll be using, but I'm not an architect and I'm not the one developing, so I can't speak for the developer and they're in a spot where they then have to use something that they're not going to be using, so.
Have you made any decisions, or has the developer made any decisions in terms of what systems they're going to use for heating and cooling?
Yes, we have. Writing this down real quick so I can pass this. Yeah, I have our engineer with us today, so.
They're handy to have around.
They are handy.
Thank you. My name is Mark Benz. I'm with Multi-Tech Engineering. I'm the project engineer. Many of you know I've been doing a lot of multi-family projects throughout my that's 50 years of engineering in this community. But to answer your question, so these units, all the infrastructure, interior infrastructure goes into these units relative to lights and stuff will be the modern energy efficient units. All the units will have a believe it, I don't know, might be saying something, there'll be heat packs on them, so they'll have heat and air conditioning units. And then the interior is generally have more conventional something like that. They also have the comply with the latest energy code requirements to ventilation stuff. So the codes, the energy code changed a lot that impacts these buildings. There's a lot of innovations, a little bit more energy efficient than they used to be. And then better ventilation to help improve the interior atmosphere. Keep heat and cool. Such
Commissioner Clayton?
You do, I just wanted to, so I heard, that you expect to use heat pumps in terms of, the individual apartment units?
Yeah, each of them will have, actually, usually they're on the patio side and deck side.
Yeah.
They're underneath. They have a name, I can't remember what they're, but anyway, they're a heat pump that provides both heating and cooling to that area.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have anybody from the neighborhood association to testify unless somebody representing the neighborhood association is here. So we move to the testifying sheet. Mr. Rue, I put your name down and originally thought maybe you're, okay, I've got two Davids in now, I guess. Yes, Mr. Rue, would you like to come up? I'm confusing you, David, the other David.
It's your one.
Just your wife, that's right. Welcome to the podium, David. You can state your name and address for the record, or if you just would rather say the ward that you're in, and we'll have 5 minutes to.
My name is David Brew. I live on 12 Pines. I do not live in the city, so I don't have a ward. I have.
Just speak away.
Okay, perfect. So, I'm not for it. I'm not against it. I'm neutral. My experience from what's been done in our neighborhood, I have no say. This complex unit is going to have almost 400 units, and we already have 900 in our neighborhood within a mile of my house. It's going to add a tremendous amount. So, you know, it is what it is. You guys make the decision. I don't have any say over it. All I'm here for is there's a couple of things that we have concerns with. I've talked with my neighbors. Building 6, 7, and 8, which is, may I use your house? Which is right in here and right here. So right up against the property line, there's 30 feet from what I see on the map, 30 feet of setback. The buildings are going to be 38 feet, 4 inches tall from floor level. That doesn't mean grade level. In my neighborhood, when you guys have developed, you raise the grade behind me. You raise the grade, so we're talking 40 feet at 40 feet tall, that my neighbors are going to look at a 30-foot tall building. All we're asking for is on the perimeter that the areas that meet our street and Seattle Slough, drop them down to 2-story, give us that little buffer, make it look a little bit more of a nicer neighborhood, give us something, because I mean, I've been in my neighborhood for over 25 years in my street. I've seen a lot of stuff going on. Like I said, we don't have any say. You guys, you know, we're in the county, you guys are in the city, you guys do what you want in the city, it's in the county. I did talk to the neighborhood association. They don't have, or Southeast, they're not gonna have a meeting until next week, so that's why there's no comments on that. With the street that you guys are gonna be putting through, once again, it's gonna be, our street is 34 feet wide. The proposed is 30 feet wide according to the map. All we would like is a couple speed humps on our street. Stop signs, I know stop signs, you know, everybody loves stop signs, but those are just a suggestion to people, whether they want to stop or not. Speed humps will actually deter people from speeding through our neighborhood. As far as the chariots, I mean, we don't, in our area, we're going to have over 1,200 apartments with this new complex. It's not conducive to the neighborhood because we don't have any public transportation. Everybody, so, you know, whatever you guys take that as however you want. The walkway to the school, you guys say that, oh yeah, we can walk, but the school districts say, no, we're not going to be able, they're not going to open it. So it's just a useless path that people will just graffiti. I mean, Marco and their family, they live on Seattle Slough. They see a lot of this stuff. And I'm not saying, you know, like I said, all we want is just maybe a little bit of a nicer look from our neighborhood, because we do live in the neighborhood. And we have tons of apartments around us, all we want is. Maybe just make it look a little nicer instead of us looking at a 40-foot plus building. So,
Ma'am, please don't speak out. We'll have you come up and testify in just a minute, okay? Thank you. Questions from commissioners for this gentleman, Mr. Weir? Max? Thank you for your time.
Excuse me, I just want to clarify where you live in relation to the development.
so I live right in this,
Okay, so you already had it. All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Is there anybody else that would like to come up to the podium and testify? You sure can. Hop on up there and you could just state your name and the area that you live in or your address, and you would have 5 minutes also.
Can I add one thing? I know it's not my time zone.
Wait, let's let these folks testify. Stay back up.
Hi, my name is Tedomira Aguilar, and I live in the Sierra Slope. And this is my son Mario and my husband, Espiritu. And I heard the conversation with my neighbor, and I'm happy for here too. My English is not very good, my son can only more better. And que sí está bien que pongan como yo tuve un accidente y lo que
So she wants to address that there was a car accident that she had went through here that I was on the corner of Clydesdale and Seattle Slough. There's some of our neighbors drive really fast leaving that neighborhood. Let me see here. About 10 years ago. So this is. And I'm just really concerned about the graffiti in our neighborhood. Yeah, and my name is Mario Aguilar Jr. I've lived here at this house since with my parents since I was a 6th grader at Hop Middle School. So I've seen like the development of everything, and it breaks my heart to see the homeless in the neighborhood. Sometimes I want to feel bad for them and want to do something about it. Our church is also on Portland Road, so we live in that neighborhood. So we tried starting like things to do in the neighborhood for crime forces with the gangs. Sometimes I'm up really late at night and I'm just like, I never see them graffiti, but I do see people in the area by Winco. So there are camps. There's been camps in our neighborhood at the very dead end of Seattle Slough, and we don't want to be aggressive towards them, but we sometimes want to be proactive to the city. I also think it's a great idea to put that pedestrian bridge. I think the way that things have been developing, it's been very well done, but at the same time, it has a lot more effort. Like if you guys don't know really where the neighborhoods to get out of our street, like the Arabian, you guys need to be going out to our neighborhoods and actually like spending some time in our neighborhood. Like what Tina was doing with tents, like I think Tina needs to spend like a day or two in tents and see if that's how do we experience homelessness. I also think that that we need to get more of the neighbors together. I'm single, I don't have kids, but I go to the city, so I go to the school board meetings at Miriam Miller. Because I believe that kids need to be raised in good schools nowadays, but there has to be like a awareness with their community to gather everyone together that live there, that have been there for decades, like my neighbors here. And you also as well, like I went door knocking for like the last campaign for the governor. So I believe in our we have a good neighborhood, and some of our neighbors are elderly and they're scared. They don't know that they know about the meeting, they saw the sign. So my only thing I believe is that we can just pray for the development of this neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Aguilar. Any questions for Mr. Aguilar or Mrs. Aguilar? Thank you very much. Mr. Reed, you had like 1 minute left of your 5 minutes. If you were to use it up, please come back and state your name again, just so they're recording those who's talking.
David Rue, in Clydesdale. So I just kind of want to touch back on to, our neighborhood. These are single family. This area here is 2 stories. These 2 are also 2-story apartments. This is a 3-story apartment complex, and as you can see that it butts up next to 2 stories. So the precedent is there that with this neighborhood here on Polo, and this neighborhood, this apartment complex, and this apartment complex, and these residential homes, they went with a 2-story. Also, so you know, it's there. You guys can adjust it. Give us just 3 units that are 2-story. Also, the multi-tech lady said that there was a neighborhood meeting. We never received notice about it. Never heard anything about it. So
Are you within 250 feet?
yeah, I'm right. Here's the property. And here's my house. Three blocks down from the edge of the property.
I think
So
Grace has got a comment for you.
Yeah, so the neighborhood association is a volunteer organization that covers the area. I know you guys live in a county, but you can still participate in the city one that surrounds you. But they don't send notice of all their meetings. They just meet regularly every month. You can get on their website and get on an email list for their agenda, but they don't send out, they don't have money to like invite people every month to their meetings.
I understand that.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
now you can see the disconnection between the city and the county as people that live in the county. So we don't have this information.
Right. So we did send notice of the public hearing, so you got that notice, right?
Yeah, we got that notice.
Yeah,
That's
so it does
it's-
contain
it's the reason why I'm here.
information about the neighborhood association. Notice for people that have never heard that there's a neighborhood
Right, and
association.
I contacted our neighborhood association. I talked to the guy that was listed on the sheet, and he said he's out of town and they don't meet. So here we are, I'm by myself with fellow neighbors. I mean, like I said, we're not opposing it. We just want some conditions.
Well, I think your time is up. A little bit extra. Any additional questions for Mr. Wu? Thank you. You do have the benefit of lower property taxes. I have to tell you.
That's what I would say in the county.
Okay, questions of staff, and then we'll have the applicant come back up and rebut. Any other questions at this point for staff? Bryce.
I just want to point out a couple things about the conditions of approval. The code specifically prohibits putting conditions on multi-family developments that would limit the height. If the height's below the maximum allowed, then it would, and the development density is not above the maximum, and that is a requirement of state law, in order to ensure that jurisdictions can't, make it harder to do needed housing. So I just wanted to put that out there. And the speed bumps, those would be in Marion County, if they're on Clydesdale, and if they're to the north, they're on Clydesdale and Salem. So we would have jurisdiction to install speed bumps on those streets.
That's a good clarification. Thank you, Bryce. Okay, would the applicant like to come up and rebut? Anything that you would like to rebut for 5 minutes?
Thank you. Again, Brandy Dalton with Multi-Tech. We do appreciate neighbors coming out. I think it's important for them to know what's going on in their neighborhood. My contact information is available, so they're always welcome to contact me, to ask additional questions, and see what's going on in their neighborhood as things progress on the site. A couple things did come up as far as the buildings along Clydesdale and grading. This is not, we will be doing grading along the north property line, but that area will not be elevated. And we will be meeting the required setback, which is 30 feet, as shown on the site plan. And there'll be landscaping and it'll be fenced. So those are requirements that we have to abide by. Somebody did bring up crime and the graffiti in the area, and they're right. I went out to this site and it's being used as a dump site. It's there's homeless there. So what some people don't always realize is that with more development, what comes more eyes on the street, which can create safety in the area. You get this area developed, you don't have homeless living on the site, you have more people keeping an eye on the roads and their neighbors. So That's typically what comes from additional development, especially on a vacant lot this size. And the last thing I wanted to address was the neighborhood meeting. We did notify the neighborhood association, and I also had a virtual open house. So how that was, everybody within 250 feet of the small piece was notified. It was online and the site was posted as well. I don't have that date, I don't know if Bryce does, but that was done as a requirement for the conference zone change.
Awesome.
So that's it.
Great. Any questions? The applicant, Commissioner Fox.
I do have one question, and maybe I misheard this, but did I hear correctly that it's going to be a fully gated community?
Yes,
There will not be access through it.
that's correct. It will be fenced, pedestrian, just pedestrian access through it, but it will be fenced as required.
Okay, so vehicular prevention of vehicular access outside of that community, correct? Only pedestrians can pass through it.
Well, we have our street connections for vehicles, so obviously those vehicles are gonna be able to go through the neighborhood, but it'll be fenced along the boundaries where there aren't vehicle access. That's what you mean. So,
Okay, so there won't be, it's not literally gated to.
no, I'm
prevent
sorry,
people
you were
from
talking about like a
passing
gate for the entrance. No, we do have some developments that do that. This will not be one of those because of the many street connections, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brandy, appreciate it. So are there any requests from somebody who has testified to agree to keep the record open? Don't just see that from. Anybody? So the request, if you've testified, well, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've testified, you can request that the record remain open so we don't take a vote tonight. But it's to allow additional evidence to be submitted that's not been reviewed already. Okay, so with that, I will close the hearing and I will look to Commissioner Levin for a motion.
I will make a motion that we approve design case review number CPC, CC, CU, UGA, SPR, ADJ, DAP, DR 2301.
Thank you. With the addition of condition 33.
Sorry, with the addition of condition 33.
Do I have a second on that motion? I'll second. Commissioner Slater is our second. Let's open it up for discussion amongst the commissioners. Thoughts on this proposal? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
If I may, I've got a couple of comments, some to address, I think, what we've heard tonight, and then also some to address comments from the public, which I appreciate having the public come down and speak. It's nice to hear the involvement. I thought it was interesting, the connection of the pedestrian path over 22 near the south end of this development. And I think that should speak volumes to the developer that maybe it would be a good idea of their own to just extend that multi-mode pathway to the south so that it creates the opportunity for connection. Might also create the pressure of the school to create an access to the school from that south boundary, but it's just a suggestion. A couple of things that I feel like we hear regularly regarding apartments is the connection of apartments and crime and apartments and traffic. And I think there's actually a misnomer there. And so I wanted to share, my office is just 2 blocks away from here. 15 years ago, there was hardly any crime or no crime. Crime is as minimal as graffiti, which will not get a police response today. And as severe as somebody trespassing and potentially dangerous to the tenants in our building. We deal with that on a regular basis, and we're right across from City Hall. And so the point is that over the years, I think that homeless and crime are visible to us all. all of our neighborhoods. It is not just yours in particular. And that's as unfortunate as that is. Too many times neighbors that are concerned about development associate changes that they're starting to see. It's maybe related to what's going on in the larger city than it is the recent apartment developments. Regarding the apartment heights and the setbacks, to hopefully create some ease of what's going to be facing the backyard. It won't be a wall, which at least it's not a wall. It'll be a couple of buildings with some visible airspace, some sky in between. But if you consider the height and the setback that they're meeting, it is in almost proportional ratio of what the side or backyard setbacks would be for single family residents. So if you consider looking up past your neighbor's roof line and can just consider, well, if that just continued up that angle, that's kind of what you'll envision when you look back only at those three particular buildings. So again, it's not a full blockage of the skyline behind your homes. And so I don't think it's the vision of what's there is going to be as severe as what's experienced in real life. A lot of times they are envisioned to be a lot taller and closer than when the developments are finished and you get to see the actual product in real life and it doesn't look as big in scale. So I hope that maybe that visual picture and kind of that ratio maybe helps a little bit with perspective. And so those were the only comments that they had written down.
Other comments? Discussion, Commissioner Slater.
I'll go. So I'm really torn on this application for a couple reasons. It seems like this is a little bit of a policy dilemma for us. We're trying to increase single family housing, multifamily housing, and this certainly does that. I think it makes a considerable dent in our gap of multifamily housing. But we're also trying to get internal density in the kind of the inner core of our city. And we're also trying to have good walking and pedestrian connectivity. And, you know, this is not a neighborhood that's well designed for connectivity at all. To me, it represents what we're trying to get away from in our community. And so it's a little bit, it's just confusing for me on how to do this. We need the housing. In large ways, I think this does meet most of the criteria. And so there's a persuasive case to vote for it, but it's also just simply going in the wrong direction of where we're trying to go. I was very glad to hear that there was some awareness of climate change, the need to be efficient with that. So I think that was it was helpful to hear that. But I'm a little bit stuck at this point.
Yeah, I can see how you have that thought. I know that through our Salem plan, a lot of these areas have been rezoned to allow for multifamily housing. So over time, you will see that kind of build out occurring. Right now, it's almost, you know, an outlier development. So I understand what you're saying on that. But, you know, hopefully looking at some connectivity with Chariots, I know that that's not exactly what we're looking for, but I don't think all the density that we're looking at is just in our interior core. We can't do that. We can't meet our housing needs just providing more dense housing options in our city core. So I don't know, other thoughts. I can see why you would be like, yes, Commissioner Fox.
Maybe just to echo Commissioner Slater's thoughts with that. I think, and I'm not sure if there is an opportunity to do this on this development, but I agree, you know, we do need to provide the housing. But I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can also provide the supporting amenities that lead to those equitable communities and climate friendly communities that support walking and biking to different areas and having that sense of community that does not just extend to housing only. And it looked like in the site plan, there's one small recreational building proposed, which seems very small in scale compared to the relative to the scale of the development. And I agree. I would like to just see maybe some effort put forth to again, just try and address at least some of the goals that we're striving for, which do provide for more efficient and solar or EV charging stations,
And a lot of those are now required, but it wasn't with this property, in this development.
right,
You know,
but it is
finals.
before us now, so.
Yeah, it is, but I don't think we're able to retrofit that application with that current.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one. There's a comp plan zone change, but it's just a small portion of the property, and the rest of the property is zoned IC. And so industrial commercial, and so really the main application before you tonight is the conditional use permit. So is this a use that should be allowed in the zone? It is allowed conditionally. And a conditional use is generally it's allowed, but conditions might need to be imposed to make it more compatible. The city just lost the Land Use Board of Appeals and denying a conditional use permit for housing in a commercial zone. We lost very easily. It's like, no, they're just like, no, what are you doing? You cannot deny a conditional use permit for housing because the criteria for the conditional use permit are not clear and objective. And so under state law, you can only apply clear and objective standards to housing. And so we would staff where the conditional use criteria are, is it compatible with the general area? That's not clear and objective because two people, you and I could disagree on that, right? It's not 5 feet or something measurable. And then since then, the city's actually changed the code to no longer allow housing in this zone with conditional use. We only allow mixed use housing, so that's being a mixed use building to get around that and solve for that problem. But this application came in before that code amendment. So I don't necessarily think the planning commission, I would advise you that you do not have the ability to deny this conditional use permit under what the city's just gone through. We lost it, we had to pay attorney's fees. It wasn't, they were very clear. It was very clear. So you do have discretion on the comp plan zone change, but again, it's a very small part of the property. So you could say that that portion should remain RA, residential agriculture, and they would have to redesign the site a little bit to remove some of the housing. Otherwise, we're looking at like a site plan review, right? Do they meet the criteria for setbacks, height, that kind of stuff? They do have some zoning adjustments. Again, that's discretion. So Bryce went over what they were. We recommend approval of 2 and denial of 1. But as far as telling them they should have less housing to have more amenities, I just don't think through this application and the criteria that apply, we have that capability. Which is disappointing to me as well as to you. Through our Salem, for example, for single family, we've done neighborhood hubs are required in 5 acres. We've tried to use almost our major corridors to mixed use to try to get housing and commercial uses together and that kind of thing. But for the specific application, I don't see a way that we could push them to change their plan to do something like that.
Other discussion. Commissioner Slater.
I have a motion for yet another condition.
So you want to amend the motion?
Thank you, I would. So I would like to add, I'd like to move that we add a condition, and that is that the Leland cypress trees identified on the landscape plan should be replaced with evergreen species from the city's approved street tree list. And the reason I'm making that motion is that Leland cypresses are not particularly viable in the long term. They're structurally weak, fast-growing tree. They're invasive in a number of states. Not in Oregon, they're invasive in a number of states. And they're actually not on our recommended street tree list. So while these are not necessarily all street trees, I think that it would make sense if we were to forego the Leland cypresses for something that's more durable and will provide a long-term benefit to the community rather than cost to replace them down the road.
Okay, you spoke really fast.
Oh, did I?
That would have been probably a good point to bring up staff and the applicant up just to get, but we've closed the hearing. So it's hard for me to get feedback on that idea, which I'm sure is a great suggestion. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. So,
We need a second on that.
you do need a second before we can discuss. Do I have a second? Second by Heller. Okay, you want to replace the cypress trees with something more durable? Is that the takeaway?
With an evergreen more durable, and at this point, I recommended that they work off of the city's approved street tree list, which has a number of options.
So we have a motion, we have a motion to amend, we have a second on that, so let's talk about that. I think you've already explained it. Questions or discussion on that motion to amend, we'll vote on that before we vote on it. Yes, Commissioner Clinton.
I know from some prior experience that when street tree called out, that it's because neighboring properties or adjoining developments have that sort of some uniformity. Do we know if that's the case here, if those trees extend on the other property by chance? Anybody that can participate in this part of the
Yeah, which is just us right now, so there you go.
Yeah,
That's just, yeah, it's just the discussion. All right.
So I guess that's one question that I have, but I general concept, I don't see any problem with amending the original motion.
Can Bryce talk to us? Please talk to us, Frank. Jeez.
When you're talking about like adjacent properties of England cypress, and these trees are along the street, either East England cypress are scattered throughout the development site, so these aren't like street trees built out in the shade system, they're just. And I believe Commissioner Slater's motion is to, pick a list from the street tree list, because those trees are generally acceptable throughout the city, durable and appropriate for Salem. And so that they're designated as street trees themselves, so. These are just other site trees. They're not a majority of the trees. They're just a lesser amount of trees that are kind of around buildings and different areas like site.
So how many are there?
Understood.
I think there were
26. 26.
26.
47.
Okay. Other discussion. I don't feel like I have enough to add to this conversation, but I'm assuming the street tree list of suitable replacements is a reasonable list.
Yes.
In fact, even though we can't consider cost in these decisions, it would be comparable. Okay. I feel a little bit better about it. Any other conversations before we vote on that underlying motion to add condition 34 to our list of conditions? Seeing no other hands raised, Zachary, would you call the roll? Please signify by saying aye if you're in favor of this particular motion.
Commissioner Ekis,
Aye.
Commissioner Fott,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Nay.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerrero Brendo.
Aye.
Motion passed. Okay, so now we're back to the overriding motion, the first motion, the big one. Any more discussion on that motion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, 33. Yes, that motion does include that additional 33 of the chariots conversation. And now condition 34 is added to it. And so, Commissioner Akers.
Well, I just want to say, I kind of feel like everybody else that I'm stuck. But I can't find any reason under existing rules, procedures, conditions, whatever, to actually oppose it.
Thank you. Any other insightful comments, Commissioner Heller?
I don't know whether it's insightful, but I'm concerned about the market rate discussion, and we need more middle level housing, so I'm concerned that that won't help our community, because we don't know what kind of income level will be renting here.
And that's a great concern. It's not anything that we can consider.
I know, but it's still troubling.
It is. Gosh, we feel so happy here right now. Okay, any other comments? Zachary, would you please call the roll, signify by saying aye if you're in favor, nay if you're opposed.
Commissioner Ekis,
Aye.
Commissioner Fott,
Aye.
President Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Vieira Brenda.
Aye.
Motion passed, thank you. And thank you, Aguilars, for coming and being through and family. Moving on to special orders of business, we don't have any, we don't have the information reports, but we do have a planning administrator. You're really important.
Europe was lovely.
I've honestly been on vacation since the minute this meeting ended, our last meeting.
Oh my God.
Until yesterday, so not, I did nothing, I haven't even gone through all my emails, it's been a
Yes.
crazy day.
Okay, you're off the hook.
I have no idea what's going on in the world. Yeah. I had a great vacation. That's what I. Didn't answer any emails, didn't do anywhere, so.
Three of you went out, three of you came back.
That's right, that's right. All in one piece and everything was well, so.
Actually.
Don't pronounce it.
I think Olivia worked really hard while I was gone, so. Great. For that.
Comments for the good of the order?
Oh, I have a couple questions for Lisa. She's not getting off that easy, but
Oh,
I did do what you told me and I voted the right way this time. I don't always do that, so. So kind of picking up a little bit on what happened today and the last week on this issue of density and walkability and things like that. You know, I spent some time, looking at the map and looking at the rules on density and walkable communities. And, one of the things that really occurred to me is that it's gonna be really hard to achieve that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we get there because, what we zoned over 1,000 acres, I think, mixed use. I mean, just by a little back of the envelope, is that's just like billions and billions of dollars of investments that's going to have to go in to reshape that. And when it takes 2 years at the earliest to do any sort of project here of any scale, but by 3 or 4 years, we're trying to cut greenhouse gas in half in 13 years. And we're hoping that our land use changes make a significant contribution to people walking and biking. Meanwhile, people walking and biking are getting killed on the streets. So I'm just wondering what your thought is on how we get there in the time that we have.
Ooh,
Wow.
yeah, that's
I'll
what
let you like.
Things are great, actually. Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that I don't think that we thought land use was gonna be the big thing to change our GHG, right? We knew from our inventory that transportation is what, like, our biggest generator. Land use is a small component, right? Connectivity, density, that kind of stuff. And as planners, land use planners and community development, that's what we wanted to focus on. And there was also community desire to update our comprehensive plan, right? So it wasn't just about that. And that's why we're very eager to kick off the transportation system plan, right? To look at our streets and how they're designed. It takes more than a plan, right? So you can have a great plan. I mean, our transportation system plan today is not a terrible plan. It has a whole bike walk element. And it comes down to what are we building, what are we funding, what are we requiring other people to build, what are our priorities. And so I think those things get lost in the day-to-day decisions the city makes every year, every day, every minute, you can have all these great plans. And then people make other decisions based on who's in the room, what's in front of them, who's talking to them at the moment. So I think it's difficult. I think it's gonna take a lot of sustained leadership to have that as their focus in all their decision making. And I think that's really hard for an organization the size of ours and all the different competing interests. I mean, so, there was testimony against opening the airport to commercial service, right? And yet the entire council voted for it, right? But they also voted for the climate action plan and our Salem, right? So there's some people in the community, like, how do these things line up? And there's different competing interests. And so they're looking at that for like our economy and various things. And so I think it's hard. I don't know. What is your answer, Commissioner Slater? We chip away at it every day. We talk about fighting a good fight, like, why are you arguing with this multifamily developer about putting in a street? Because it's easier to say, you don't need a street. You don't want a street. You don't need a street. But we're out there fighting the fight. We need a street. We need the bike path. We need the this, the that. And mind numbing, you know, there's days when Bryson was like, I'm ready to retire, so I'm quitting. No, right? All the small things, right? We argue about the design, we argue about meeting the maximum setback, we argue about putting, you know, why do I have to have an articulated entrance? Well, we want people to like look at the house and go walk up and know it's your front door and that's where they knock and just all the little things.
So what would
And
you
we
do
thought
if you were
it's
Since
exhausting.
you both asked.
Yeah, what, please tell me, yeah.
So a couple honest thoughts. One is I think that we
Are the
can,
other thoughts not honest?
well, some of them are slippery.
Okay.
This one is left with
I
my.
get it.
I think that the planning department, which staffs the planning commission, could use the planning commission better to advocate for some of the things that you think should happen. I think we're all here, we know elected officials, we're comfortable speaking out. We know people in the neighborhood, we know people in the media. I think it would be well received if members of the planning commission were asked to be stronger advocates at city council and elsewhere for what we're trying to accomplish. I hear, and not just for me, but I think from some of my colleagues, some real frustration at the pace of change. And by a sense that maybe we're behind where we should have been maybe 10 years ago. So I think we can be better allies in trying to accomplish many of the goals that have been set already. I think that would be the first thing, and that's free. I'm free, I'm terribly free. The other thing is that I think we need to be a little bit more open-minded about taking some leadership roles in development. Right now, or what used to be urban planning, I don't think it exists anymore, was more proactive in going out in development and recruiting developers. And I think we need to take a more active role, and maybe that's making some staff changes, not new staff, but changes, and playing a more catalytic role in development. So we can say, oh, this block we really need to transform. And we're going to try and really be the catalyst to transform this so that it fits what our plan is. I think that's the second thing we could do. And the third thing I think we could do is we could really dive in and do some, whether it's neighborhood refinement plans or some of our urban renewal refinement plans, and say, okay, we want to do State Street, we've got a plan here, or not State Street, let's take north of downtown. Okay, we're going to bring in a planning firm, and we're going to really try and develop a market analysis and a transportation analysis, and really turn this into a project that we think we have a reasonable chance of building out over the next 10 years. We tend not to do that a lot. I think Fay Wright's neighborhood plan is 30 years old at this point.
There's some that don't.
And there are some that don't. And it's an expensive project. It's not an easy project. I know we don't have a lot of long range planners, but to say, you know, these are 3 areas that we really want to be successful over the long haul, you know, that's worth asking the city council to put $150,000 or $200,000 into a consultant project for and try and make that happen. So those are the 3 things that I think of certainly that we could do.
Yeah, I would say that that urban development does still do that. It's very disconnected from the planning commission. And they're limited to areas where we already have urban renewal areas, right? And so a lot of that planning and visioning was done 10, 20, 30, not 10, 20, 30, you know, years ago, 40 years ago. Some of the urban renewal areas are very old and they update them periodically for new projects. So the city, you know, the urban renewal agency just bought downtown the old UGM site, right? And then level the buildings and then that's what we're gonna do is be looking for a developer, a catalyst development. I think the most obvious example of that is North Broadway, right? So that's an urban renewal area and the city bought all the, you know, the 3 blocks and demoed them and cleaned everything up and then sold them to developers for mixed use. And there's a whole planning project to create the mixed use, you know, zoning and all of that. And that was, you know, 15, 20 years. The problem is in the new areas where we're going to be looking to, they're not urban renewal areas right now. So there's no money associated with them. And the city can't open any new urban renewal areas until we close some because we can only have a certain amount of land in urban area. And I had thought our plan was to close Fairview, but instead it got expanded to pull in the airport so money could be used at the airport instead of closing it. So parts of North Downtown that were outside the existing downtown riverfront urban renewal are on the short list for a new one. State Street's on the short list. Parts of Lancaster, there's like a short list of 3 areas we've been looking at, but now we don't have the opportunity right now because they're expanded instead of closed.
Riverfront one that could be closed relatively soon because we've done all the build out. you know, where the apartments, is that still?
No, it's part of downtown, so it's downtown riverfront together. It's a pretty big area, but it stops just short of where the Turner Brothers property is, which, you know, is potentially going to be redeveloped, so. So yeah, I think, you know, urban development and community development are one department now. It's very new, so there might be to more kind of collaboration on that. It is kind of tricky because the urban renewal agencies have their own advisory boards as well on what projects they're going to put in the plan and how they're going to prioritize spending their money. But there is a talk about maybe doing something different with those advisory agencies as part of both the boards and commissions. So as far as advocating, I think that's great. You know, I'm thinking about the bond that was passed and projects have been identified, but they're pretty vague. And so for these street projects, I'm trying to weasel my way in so I can be like, what's the design? And are you going to show that to the public? Or are you going to do all the work and then it's like, this is what we're building? Because often for bond projects, it's scoped internally by staff and presented as a cost. And then by the time people see it, it's too late to make any changes. And then we don't get street trees. We get sidewalks built at the curb because we don't have money to buy that much right away, but it's like, but you decided internally, you know, years before, and then no one got to see it. So there is a bond steering committee, the counselors and 2 community members. It's not really advertised that well. I think they've met twice. Don't think that they've seen designs yet of streets. I believe Counselor Stapleton is hoping that that will be part of the work that they do. But that's an area where I think there could be more, for example, showing like connectivity and increasing our tree canopy, better bike ped. I think the counselors, it's on their radar, but to have people support them in that, I think would be really important. I feel like the last time I heard they met, it was like 4 o'clock on a Friday in a conference room. So you really gotta be dedicated if you want to be part of that process, it seems like. But that, I think that is an area because I think that's like our one chance right now. We have a lot of money and a lot of projects, and we're not going to get this chance for decades, you know, coming up after this. So I feel like we really got to do it right if we're going to do this. So I think the council feels that way, but I think it's also the city's really set in the way that we do things, and it's hard. It's hard for the council to wade through that and figure that out.
And I think we can always, as you would like to with your free time, testify in council. Just, you can't represent, you know, I'm here to represent planning commission. You know, you could do that, but you know, you could say I'm on planning commission and I have these opinions. I think it's me. So you're always able to do that. And then, but before I forget, the Commissioner Slater, the only reason I called out a question on your condition, your suggested additional condition, is that we couldn't give the applicant a chance to talk. And that's why I was thinking maybe earlier on, and maybe that's why Ian was a little concerned tonight. But it's great to hear from the applicant about all the conditions that are placed on them before I close the hearing. So that's so understandable. Other comments for the good of the order? I'm sure everybody has April 22nd, 11 o'clock on their calendar to do planting in Peace Plaza. Many thanks to Commissioner Slater because he's really taken this one and run with it. And
Full disclosure, weeding and planting.
Weeding. I'm good at weeding.
The planting is the easy.
I'll be better at weeding. Other comments for the good of the order? If not.